This discovery is part of Wilmington's remarkable historic legacy and will be memorialized in the coming year. Immediately following the Battle of Brandywine in September of 1777, the British marched down the Concord Pike and occupied Wilmington. A lot of people don't know this. General William Howe, the commander of the British forces in America, needed Wilmington to turn it into a large hospital for the troops that he had that were wounded at Brandywine. The record shows that 112 wagons arrived in Wilmington on September 13th, 1777, carrying over 400 wounded British soldiers into the town. Given the primitive medical treatment of the era, many of these soldiers succumbed to their wounds while here in Wilmington. During the American Revolution, British soldiers were buried where they died. They didn't return them to Great Britain. And many of them were buried in mass graves. So where in Wilmington can we find the British soldiers that died here? Well, this has remained a mystery for almost 250 years. When I wrote the book that the mayor identified, in the back of the book, I said one of the unsolved mysteries is where are the dead British soldiers? And I couldn't solve that mystery, but it's solved now. I'm going to talk about it. When we connect the historical dots, the evidence leads us to the answer, a mass grave right here in the city of Wilmington. Fallen British soldiers were first interred in the 2-acre Poor and Stranger Cemetery, which existed in 1777 at 11th and King Streets. Now, the old City Hall and the courthouse building on Riley Square occupies that location today. In the mid-19th century, the soldiers were reinterred at Wilmington Brandywine Cemetery on Delaware Avenue. Credible evidence using modern algorithms suggests that at least 38 British soldiers are buried there in an unmarked mass grave. Now, this is a conservative estimate. I personally believe it's much higher. But these soldiers who died 3,000 miles from their homes in Great Britain do not lie alone. And this brings us to another chapter in Wilmington's notable historic legacy. Just 4 years after the British occupation of Wilmington, the Battle of Yorktown, Virginia was fought in October of 1781. It was a decisive battle of the American Revolution, and after the battle, many of the participating Continental Army units marched north back to their homes, and that brought them right through the city of Wilmington. One of these units was the famous 1st Rhode Island Regiment. The regiment had distinguished itself at Yorktown. However, by the time it reached Wilmington, large numbers of its soldiers were stricken by smallpox. As you might know, the disease was a scourge during the American Revolution. A general hospital was set up in Wilmington on Market Street under the direction of Dr. Henry Latimer. Coincidentally, he is also buried in Brandywine, or Wilmington Brandywine Cemetery. Now, this hospital was right up the street. It's right where the Opera House is today. It was called the Old Academy Building at that time. In 1777, this was just 300 meters from the Poor and Stranger Cemetery. 28 Rhode Island soldiers died and were buried here in Wilmington. What makes this tragic episode so significant and imperative for us is that we know their names. Now, this is highly unusual for a mass grave in the Revolutionary War. Very, very fortunate. Even more compelling is the fact that 14 of the identified soldiers, exactly half, are African American soldiers. They were fighting not only for the country's freedom, but for their own personal freedom. Rhode Island soldiers, like their British counterparts, were first interred at the Poor and Stranger Cemetery and eventually moved to the mass grave site at Wilmington Brandywine Cemetery between 1850 and 1853. What happened during that period is the city started expanding up Market Street and they needed that piece of land. Ladies and gentlemen, the city of Wilmington has a mass grave containing at least 66 soldiers who perished here between 1777 and 1782. We have the great good fortune of knowing the names of all of the Rhode Island soldiers and at least 5 names of the British soldiers. And here are 2 examples. Private Primus Brown of Johnson, Rhode Island, an African American soldier, Enlisted on March 20th, 1778, he served in the 6th Company of the Rhode Island Regiment. He died in Wilmington on January 10th, 1782, and the records indicate he had an exemplary term of service. Lieutenant Adam Drummond of the 33rd Regiment of Foot, British Army, was wounded at the Battle of Brandywine, brought to Wilmington, and he died here on September 21st, 1777. Lieutenant Drummond's grief-stricken father in Scotland wrote a poem to honor his fallen 20-year-old son. The National Archives of Scotland just sent me this moving poem last month. His father assumed that Adam had died at Brandywine, never knowing his son was brought to Wilmington and died here 10 days after the battle. Such were the times. These British and American soldiers have lain unknown and unremembered for over 250 years. All this will change as the city prepares to honor them in ceremonies that will be conducted later this year as part of the 250th anniversary of independence. It's a wonderful and humbling opportunity to pay tribute to the heroes of the Rhode Island Regiment and to their young British counterparts who died so far away from their homes. After lying together, unknown for so long, they will not be forgotten as the city of Wilmington and its people honor and remember them during the coming year. Thank you.